Hello, welcome back to What Now on the Threshold of Life, Death, and Grief. And here I am with my friends and colleagues,
David Kennedy
and Red Keating.
And I'm Julie Brown. And we are delighted to have a return guest, one of our few return guests, MaryCatherine McDonald. Hi, MC. Welcome.
Hi, I am so thrilled to be with you again. Thank you for having me.
You were one of our earlier first guests that we ever interviewed on the podcast in season 1. And for those people who haven't heard it, please go back and have a listen. We were talking about your book, Unbroken, Why the Trauma Response is Never Wrong. And you really helped us unpack, understanding trauma and the intersection of grief and trauma. And today we are here to talk about joy and life and living. And so we'll dig into that in a moment, but I'm just going to take a moment and read your bio just as a way of introduction to our listeners. Dr. MaryCatherine McDonald is a research professor, author, and trauma expert whose work is reshaping how we think about healing. With over 15 years of experience studying trauma and resilience, she's on a mission to help people break free from survival mode and reclaim joy, especially when it feels impossible. Her new book, The Joy Reset, unpacks the 6 hidden barriers that keep us from happiness and offers science-backed strategies to rewire the brain for hope. Whether she's teaching, writing, or speaking, Dr. McDonald is here to challenge the idea that joy is not just for easy times. It's for all of us, even in the hardest, darkest moments.
And boy, do we need it.
And boy, do we need it.
Yeah.
Right now. Yep.
Right now. So given the fact that we first met you when we were talking about trauma, and just as a way of introduction, when we invited you back, Red said, hey, what about the fact that the title of our podcast says On the Threshold of Life, Death, and Grief? When are we going to talk about life? And like being life affirming. And I said, well, I've been following MC online. She's doing some great work around joy. Can you walk us to how did we get from trauma to joy, which I know probably isn't so far away, but it could sound like they're two totally different places to be.
Oh, completely. I think it's a similar thing that we do with grief. We assume that grief is sort of like a primary color emotion. It's only one thing. But as we all know in this room and all of your listeners know or are learning, that grief is many things, right? There is joy in grief. There's beauty, there's connection and love. And the same is true of trauma. There's joy in trauma healing. There's joy. I think that we've basically misdefined joy and hope in popular culture, and we've given them sort of a gilded front. We have these ideas of joy and hope as these sort of kind of flighty, like maybe it's a luxury emotion that you can get to if you have time. It's not as valuable or important as struggle and strife and stress and trauma. But what I've learned in my own trauma story and also in working with my clients is that joy meets you in the darkest moments. It is one of the fundamental anchors that is a mercy, that we find in these dark moments. And it can be as simple as a funny moment in a really terrible, awful thing. I tell this story in the book of the giant camels on the altar at my father's funeral, which, you don't expect yourself to be laughing at your father's funeral. And then joy meets you there anyway, right? Whether you like it or not. And I think that when we learn how to recognize that and let it in, it changes our entire worldview and rewires our brain. And so I think kind of making a bridge between trauma and joy is both more true to what trauma actually is and what it reveals, and also is critical in healing trauma.
Can you walk us through, you talk a lot about the fear circuit, the hope circuit. Can you talk us what's happening in the brain when we focus on joy?
We can go into this more in depth, but just to give us sort of a baseline understanding of what's going on, you can sort of think of your brain, when you talk about the brain, you can talk about the structures. You hear about the prefrontal cortex or the amygdala. You can talk about neurons that fire together, wire together. You can talk about blood flow. Another way you can talk about the brain is by thinking about it like a circuit, a set of circuits, like in an old house. And if you've ever lived in an old house, you know that certain circuits take a ton of energy, and there's not an infinite amount of energy that's coming into the circuit. And so sometimes when one circuit is online, that means none of the other circuits can be. They're counterposed.
Mm.
And so what folks discovered in the study of neuroscience is that there are two circuits that run completely counter to each other, and we can call them, for the sake of conversation, the hope circuit and the fear circuit. And we know this from experience, right? When you're afraid, if something really scares the hell out of you, whether that's like a nightmare or a scary movie or just a terrible thought, or you opened the news app or whatever, you don't feel hope and joy when you're in that terror. You can't. And that makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. You wouldn't want to be distracted by joy or hope in that moment. You need to be focused on the fear that it is real and then the survival. And so what they did not expect, and they found out in about 2015, which is a long time ago, and I don't think enough people are talking about, is that the same is true of hope. When you're in the hope circuit, when you're feeling gratitude, when you're imprinting joy, when you're sort of imagining something in the future that you're looking forward to, any of those things, you cannot be afraid because those circuits are counterposed in both directions. So the fear circuit impedes the hope circuit, but the hope circuit also impedes the fear circuit.
Mm-hmm.
I said I was going to make that simple, and I think I made it more complicated. Does that make sense?
No, that makes sense. And that's actually amazing to think about.
Isn't it so cool? Like this is one of the things, because we talked about Unbroken. I'm so endlessly fascinated by the mechanisms that have evolved just naturally, right? Or for whatever reason, whatever you believe in that way, that are so sophisticated and genius, and that we spend so much time feeling shame about. The trauma response is one of them. This joy, hope circuit countering the fear circuit is another.
Can you give us some examples of how you're working with some of your clients with this circuitry?
Yes. So carefully is the is the most important word. And I tell a story, I think it's in the preface of the book or chapter 1. And here's the thing, like I have incredible respect and deep love for folks in the history of positive psychology. And I think one of their blind spots, we all have blind spots, is in building this bridge between folks who are dealing with trauma and all of these practices that we know are helpful in positive psychology. So keeping a gratitude journal, taking a moment out of your day and imagining something you're excited for or looking forward to, or building out your future. We know that all of these things work, but I think one of the hugest gaps is that those tasks have not been adapted for folks who have a trauma history or who are dealing with an incredible amount of stress, which right now is kind of all of us, I think, in different ways. And so the first time I tried to sort of use joy with a client in a really intentional way, she told me to go F myself, closed her computer, and that was the end of our therapeutic relationship and the session. Like I've never talked to her again. That was it. And that's on me. That's my fault, because it was the right tool deployed in the wrong way at the wrong moment. Because I think, and this is kind of the thing that happens so often, and one of the reasons why I think joy and hope get a bad rap, it's like telling someone who is drowning that they just really need to try a yoga class,
Yeah.
And it's like, what? Like, can you get out of throw me a line and then we can talk about yoga, maybe. And so when I work with my clients, especially, and I'm so grateful for that client because it's kind of a funny story, but it's also heartbreaking. But I'm also really grateful for it because it was such a call to like, you got to rethink everything here. You cannot deploy these tools with these clients in this way because it does harm. And that's exactly what we're trying not to do. And so I became really devoted to figuring out, okay, I know the brain science makes sense. I know these tools are going to help folks who have trauma. We just have to figure out how. So I've developed this like little toolbox, and I hope to keep doing this, of exercises that really keep in mind what trauma does to the nervous system and to the brain and to your thought process and the way that you connect with other people and relate to the world. And then, okay, so now how do we fit gratitude in? Or how do we fit joy in? And so my most like popular practice right now is tiny little joys, which is that you take, 5 seconds, we can do it right now, and just sort of scan your immediate environment for something that gives you a tiny little feeling of joy or happiness. And so I have all these little like things on my desk that people have given me. And every time I glance at them, I'm like, oh, that was so nice. They thought of me and they brought that to me from their vacation or whatever. And the reason that that is helpful is because you're not asking someone to find joy in a life that feels uninhabitable, right? You're not saying like, okay, I know that everything in your life is wrong. You're dealing with all this grief and stress and trauma. Tell me what's good.
Because think positive.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Right. Go F yourself. I'm gonna close my computer, right? Like,
right.
And you're also, I think one of the things we need to understand that we have also missed about joy is that it can be disruptive to a hypervigilant nervous system.
Yes.
When you have trauma or you have an incredible amount of stress, joy is going to feel counterposed to everything that you're bracing for. And so you're going to resist it and reject it. And so tiny little joys is a way to say like, okay, let me just sort of like open my hope circuit for 1 second and I'm going to close it again. And then if I do that every single day and then close it again, and then every single day and then close it again, then eventually I'm going to be rewiring my brain to allow in and notice hope and joy in the world. And it's kind of remarkable. It's such a small practice, but it makes a huge difference in how you see the world. So basically, to go back to your question, how do you work with clients? I try to meet them where they are and figure out if they are resisting joy, where is that coming from? What's the source? I identify 6 joy thieves in the book. So we try to figure out like which one is active or which ones, and then what practices are small enough that we could start them. And then I always try to make sure to explain what's happening, because I think when we understand why an intervention works, that we're much more likely to utilize it.
So if I can ask a very basic question for me, how do you describe joy? Like what's joy, and how is that different from happy and other things? Like what is the key piece here?
That's such a good question. And it's like haunting me because I think there's a million ways to describe it, right? Happiness, I think of as more in the sort of like Aristotelian, eudaimonic sort of like sustained, thriving, flourishing kind of thing. Joy is a sparkle, right? Like just a little feeling, I think sometimes explaining examples of them is a better way to define them, because we all start to see them. But like when you make your bed, you have fresh sheets, and then you get into bed and into the fresh sheets and you just go like, oh yeah, or you take a bite out of something that you were looking forward to eating all day, or you turn your face to look out the window and it's been raining for a week and all of a sudden the sun is coming through, like, or your favorite song comes on when you're in the grocery store, or you're scrolling through social media and you see a puppy video that makes you like actually really laugh. Those moments of like that sparkle, that freedom, that that little glittering bit that makes you sort of appreciate existence. That's joy.
I like that, because it's not, when you're describing that to me, I'm sitting here thinking that, yeah, it's not that I have to manufacture it. It's just I have to be open to it, right? And there's lots of those sparkles.
Yep. Yeah. Yes. And it will have, the other thing that I think is so fascinating in when I was doing the research is that it will find you. Like if you think about, the physiological sigh when you're like sobbing and you take a deep breath and then your body like takes another one. It's almost like unwilling, and had that refreshing feeling of that like second big breath. That's in a moment of angst and anguish. There's that little fragment. Or like the feeling of hunger that you get after you've been really sick with a stomach bug, right? That's not a joyful moment. We wouldn't describe that as like, oh, I'm really happy. I just, got the stomach bug. But that little kind of bodied thing, I just think that's a miracle. And if we kind of tune ourselves to it, then we start to notice it more.
Yeah, I think that the thing that comes across is the practice of it, right?
Yeah.
To make it a habit, because your joy is messy, right? Your joy is found in dark places, and it's not the live, love, laugh sort of trivialized joy that we'll go to Canada's Wonderland. There's where we'll have fun and find joy. But that if you're open for it, it can come in some of the muckiest places if we choose to see it.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. I'm stealing that. Your joy is messy.
I was throughout, reading your latest book, which was so accessible and a joy to read, by the way.
Thank you.
Like really enjoyed reading it. I was, of course, reflecting a lot on where did I find joy in one of the darkest times of my life, which is through my cancer journey.
Yeah.
And I had this memory come up, and it was really powerful for me because it was at a time, it was very soon into the cancer journey, and I had just finished my first round of chemo. And for anybody who's been through chemo, you know that it takes sometimes a few rounds before they kind of get your meds that help manage the symptoms, the nausea and all that sort of stuff, like kind of in the right place. And so the first round was pretty horrendous. And I had a few people in my life that I felt like was doing like some of that toxic positivity stuff with me, like just think positive and that makes all the difference. And if you believe you're going to be okay, then you will be okay. And, I was kind of like, F you, like, don't give me another job to do right now when I am just, working so hard.
Right.
And I had survived my first round and I was just starting to kind of spring back from it. And my friend took me out for lunch. And I was telling her, we'd been talking about, like, I'm finding this really hard, that like on top of everything else, I feel like people need me to be positive for them or something like that. And as we were sitting there, it was a really warm day. And we were sitting there with a beer that I couldn't drink, but I ordered it anyways. And halfway through the lunch, because we'd gone on to other subjects, and I said to her, but this is a good moment. Sitting here with you and the sun shining on us, like this is a good moment.
Oh, I love that.
And she said, right. So that's where we find the positive. Is like when it just, like as David and Red just said, it's like the practice of just pay attention. And that became kind of my mantra through cancer, was every once in a while I would just be like, oh, this is an okay moment. And I so get what you mean when you say, like, because hypervigilance was running right there with me all the time, right? Yep. Like, oh, am I running a temperature? Am I getting sick? Is there something wrong? And then every once in a while, what would just poke through was, but this is a good moment. I'm sitting here watching this show with my kids, or my friends have showed up to do this puzzle, and I'm sure they don't really want to do a puzzle, but they're doing a puzzle with me to help pass the afternoon, Right, and so it became this mantra for me just to say, but this is an okay moment, or this is a good moment. So that I just to share that, like, that's how I was kind of personalizing the information of your book as I was reading it.
I love that. And I think one of the key things there is that the thing that differentiates this real, authentic joy practice from toxic positivity is that this practice requires the acknowledgement of the bad.
Yes.
Right. And so you started that story by saying you sat down and you said, like, I'm really having a hard time. And that just is, it just exists. And then once you say it and it's acknowledged by another person, instead of dismissed, oh, but you're at the end, oh, but da, 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 when it's acknowledged and allowed, then the joy can come in.
Yeah, and I think that for me, that's what you're saying is that idea that many people have, that circumstances have to be perfect before I can experience joy. And so they don't allow themselves to even think about the possibility of that in the midst of circumstances that they consider not to be amenable to joy.
Yep, absolutely.
And I think one of the key points that you make is that the joy doesn't have to be equal in size to the pain to count.
Yep.
Yeah,
Right.
I like that.
And that's so that in your example, Julie, just sitting there with a beer you can't drink with a friend in a restaurant is a joyful thing. It does not take away the hypervigilance, the fear of living with cancer and starting treatment. Right.
Yep.
But if we, like I said earlier, if we're open to it and acknowledge it, we can see it's not, there's light in the dark.
Yes. Right.
There's light in the dark, and the dark is still there.
Yep. Exactly.
But
Yep.
like you say, you have to acknowledge that the dark is still there too. Like I think you say they sit beside each other.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I imagine them sort of like, animated, right? Like that, we only look at one or the other, but I see little cartoon versions of them and they're both there. I don't want to get in trouble, but some people sometimes when they hear about tiny little joys, they say like, oh, I've heard of glimmers. Don't you mean glimmers? And this comes from Deb Dana, who's a wonderful trauma specialist who has changed the field of trauma studies and is amazing. And she had this idea years back, which I actually didn't know about until recently, of a glimmer, which she puts up as the opposite of a trigger. And I don't think triggers have opposites.
Mhm.
And I totally understand why people would think that. Okay, I'm triggered now. I need to find it. And it's kind of a mindfulness exercise, very similar to Tiny Little Joys. But when we frame that up in that way, then we are setting it up as a seesaw and saying, okay, I have a real big bad thing. I need a real big good thing to,
Right.
counter it. Or these things cannot sit side by side. They're totally opposite. And I think we need to understand that they exist. They're enmeshed.
Mhm. People talk about, oh, I need balance, but I don't find things are ever balanced. I think we live in the tension of those things, right? They're always the tension that is present.
Yeah.
And we know that people kind of have this feeling like, and it's funny, I was just at a funeral the other day, and I was really pleased that the gentleman, his wife had died, and he made it very clear, I don't want this a celebration of life to be some kind of happy experience where we can't acknowledge the sadness that happens because she died. And yet that's kind of what some people want to feel like we have to have, is just as you described, that up feeling and get rid of the other feeling,
Right.
or vice versa.
Yes.
But it's not about there's never balance, but there's tension, and they're both present in the midst of it.
I love that idea of tension because it's like a dance then,
Mm-hmm.
right? And sometimes the grief is going to be leading, and sometimes joy, and sometimes humor, and sometimes, humility, and sometimes, terror.
And it's okay. And it's
Exactly.
okay. Right.
Right.
You
It's
don't
always-
have to feel guilty or bad because you are experiencing those moments.
Yes, absolutely. I love that.
We so often polarize our feelings, right?
Mhm.
And don't see them on that spectrum or inside that tension as existing
Right.
equally in the same place.
And then we go to war with them because we've set them up against each other.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And I like that idea. And I kept being reminded of George Costanza when I was reading the book, that episode where he starts,
I love that.
where he starts to do the opposite and his whole life turns around and gets better.
Yes.
And that's very much, your sense of, if you've got guilt, if you've got grief, turn and face it as opposed to run away from it, and maybe use some of, I think you the joy thieves, and we should probably get into those,
Yeah.
and how those thieves can make us run away from the exact thing that we should be sort of turning to face. So
Yes.
so maybe if you could sort of tell us a little bit about what you mean when you talk about the joy thieves.
The joy thieves, yes. So I wish I had a story where I was like, okay, so I realized I was doing this work and then I realized there's 6 joy thieves and then I wrote this book, but the joy thieves came after the book was like finished but didn't make any sense, And so it had to be like restructured, and my editor was like, I don't know.
We're not sure we've got a book here yet.
Right, exactly. This isn't what I thought it was going to be. I don't know. And so I spent a really painful weekend with what I had, and in looking at it, I noticed that there were 3 categories, 3 kind of broad categories of things that would prevent someone from really feeling or leaning into joy and hope. And then in those 3 categories, there were these little subcategories. So the 3 categories are joy resistance, joy fear, and joy guilt. And I can just talk about each of those really briefly. So joy resistance comes, we've already been talking about this a little bit with hypervigilance. So when you are kind of constantly on alert for threat because you're under an incredible amount of stress or you're working through trauma, positive emotions like joy or hope, just by definition, ask you to lower your state of alertness. And so that can lead to a sense of vulnerability that feels untenable in that moment. And so then you resist or you reject joy. No, you think of like a sniper on watch. You're trying to show them funny memes on your phone, and they're like, I can't, no, not now, right? And the second one in joy resistance is emotional numbing, which is, I think, what happens when we've got unprocessed stuff that feels too overwhelming. And so again, as a brilliant adaptive move, we numb it, but we can't really numb selectively. So we end up then also numbing hope and joy. And so that will look like, often I'll see that in a client where they will say like, good things are happening, but they don't land.
Mm-hmm.
I can't really feel them. I don't understand why.
I got this good news, but I don't
Right.
really feel the goodness of it. I don't really feel the happiness of it. Yeah.
Like I cognitively understand that it's good, but then what, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then joy, fear, you have fear of loss. I think loss makes us really acutely aware of how fleeting joy can be. And so you might have it now, but you could lose it at any second. And you already know how painful that is. And you can't protect yourself from the losses you've been through, but you can protect yourself from future losses by refusing to connect. And so you don't connect with joy, you don't connect with hope, you don't think about your future because that's, it's a fool's errand essentially. And then fear conditioning happens. I think this is going to sound like it's rare, but I think it's actually really common when you're having a joyful time and then something terrible happens. Or in hindsight, you were having a joyful time and then something terrible happens. You unconsciously associate the bad thing with the good thing. And so whenever you feel a good thing coming in, you're like, no, 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 I don't want to engage with that because then the bad thing, the other shoe is going to drop essentially. And then joy guilt, which is the last one, has both guilt and shame in it, which is when I think joy guilt is when something awful happens and that awful thing tricks you into thinking you're supposed to feel awful forever. This happens so often with grief, right?
So often.
Right? We lose someone and then we think you notice that you're having a good day or you're feeling happy, and then that means you might be moving on, and then you feel this incredible wave of guilt. How can that be? And so you push it away. I don't want to feel that. I can't feel that. I'm not entitled to that. That's not for me. And then joy shame, which is the last one, is when you've been so like soaked in shame for whatever reason that you have internalized the belief that you are fundamentally damaged, broken, and unworthy. And so when joy comes in, when good things start to happen, you reject them. And that might look like self-sabotage, avoidance, or disconnection, any of these things. So those are the joy thieves. And then the book is sort of organized, again, after it was written, into these categories. So you can see real life examples of each one and how they kind of play out.
I like you call it shame is guilt metastasized.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
I like that too.
Yeah.
That's a great.
That's a powerful image. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Because guilt is, I mean, it makes sense. It's there for a reason, right? If you think about one of the theories about why we feel guilt is that when you do something wrong, it's in your best interest to feel bad about it so that you stay in with your group. But so by nature, then guilt is like supposed to bring you to action. Okay, I'm going to, remedy this. I hurt Red's feelings. And so now I'm going to remedy that so that we can stay in relationship. Shame is a totally different thing. It's like you have this guilt that was supposed to drive you to action, and then it just metastasizes. It takes over and starts to really erode who you are.
As I was reading about the joy thieves, thinking about so often with folks who are grieving, especially when it's been a traumatic death, there's that feeling of being scared to hope or to experience joy. And when you explore that, it's that, well, when's the other shoe going to drop? It feels scary to feel joy or to feel pleasure because I've lived through such excruciating pain. And now that I know that can happen, because now that's what life has taught me, it's going to probably happen again. And so it's like we're bracing for impact before the impact has happened.
Yeah.
And that's that I remember, just as you're saying that, Julie, I remember the group that I did run with parents who had a child die. And I remember one of the things we used to do was part of the meetings, we would just have a word and throw a word out and allow people to just explore that word. And the one time I threw out the word hope, and I'll never forget this one mom whose son had died, and she had another child, but she said to the group, I can't have hope. I can never hope again, because if I hoped the last time, and it was shattered, and I can't risk hoping again. And I just, looking at and feeling that moment of helplessness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish I had your book there.
It's such a heartbreaking story, but I think it reveals another thing we get wrong about hope, because we always tell people, like, you got to have hope, you have to hold on. No, you don't.
No.
That's just another way that we would go to war with our own emotions and feel shame for what we are feeling or not feeling, right? Hope will come. You don't have to feel it right now. Of course,
Yeah.
you can't feel hope. Like,
Right.
and I think, like, again, going back to like Julie's example of, like, I'm having a really hard time with this. And then the experience immediately after that of like this, but this is a good moment.
Mm-hmm.
Once you allow in that you've lost hope and actually just sit with it, then it's much more likely to come and find you again.
Right.
And I don't mean to suggest that losing hope is like a small thing, because I think that's its own trauma. I think I wrote a paper once called Haunted by a Different Ghost, and it was all about how, like, okay, yes, the trauma, and then the reckoning with the structure of meaning that crumbled in the trauma.
Right.
That's right.
And that's the ghost we don't talk about or reckon with. And that's so important, which is why I always sneak in existentialism into my books, much to everyone's chagrin.
No, I actually have a few of those underlined, and to see if we could weave that into the talk tonight. I was thinking about, though, as I was reading the book, that when you're working with people living with life-threatening illness, I find you don't have to even bring this up, because if you listen closely, they'll reveal it.
Yeah.
At some points, not always, you'll hear the tiny little joy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You'll hear them often say, and I'm thinking of a woman I saw yesterday. It was like, oh, this is hard. This is hard. I'm worried about my kids and this and that. And then there was like, but I still really love this.
Yeah.
And it was like sitting right there.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think my job is not to make this big, like, oh, isn't that wonderful? It was just like,
yeah.
so that sits there too.
Right. Mm-hmm. 100%. We have a built-in negativity bias. We're always going to notice, wired to notice the negative, because that's to our evolutionary advantage, but we have to manually imprint the positive or we miss it.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're missing in that whole framing, even just as I said it, is that they're both right there.
That's right.
They're both right there. Yep.
And I believe that for those of us, that when we can sit and give people this space and acknowledge the darkness, and they feel really heard and seen and understood there, that's when I think they start to sometimes naturally offer something. And we just have to be listening closely for that, to pull on that thread.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. A little sign of life comes flickering in, and then you're like, oh, wait a second. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
It's funny, in a previous life, in another job, I was working with a family, and they were sort of the grandparents of this particular program across the province. And they were fantastic. But boy, she was really starting to get irritable and aggressive and challenging in a way that wasn't usual. And I spoke with my supervisor at the time, and we determined that maybe we could tell this person that it would be okay to retire.
Oh, wow.
Right? Because they had been doing it for so long. I went up, and I was sitting in their dining room, and we had this wonderful conversation. And I said, lately it's been really different. Working with you has been very different. And I sort of explained. And I said, I wonder if it's just like you've worked for so long and so hard and you've built up this great reputation. Is it going to be hard for you to stop? Because, you don't have to keep doing that. I tried to do it in a very supportive way. And she took a big sigh. And I said, you guys can retire. And she just took a great big sigh, rolled up her sleeves, said, thanks. Now let's get back to work. And that was it. Like, and instantly there was this change, right? And it was like she just needed to be told she didn't have to keep doing this thing.
Yes.
And that's what motivated her to do it.
Yes.
And they just kept going. Yeah.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because again, like irritability and all these things, that's friction. And so it's like, okay, where's the source? What's the source of friction? A lot of the time, it's that you need a permission slip, or something needs to be allowed,
Yeah. Yeah.
And that might just be a tantrum, like a single, like, I hate this. This is really frustrating. Everything is terrible right now. Okay.
Yeah. We acknowledge the crap, acknowledge the good work, said you don't have to do anymore. And I would probably not have gotten there without the excellent supervision I received, but that push and pull back and forth came to that as a possible solution. And it was like, and it worked.
I love that.
And it was what she needed to hear, that sometimes you just don't have to.
Right. I'm obsessed recently with this idea of, like, Foucault has this chapter in Discipline and Punish called Docile Bodies. And he draws this, like, beautiful connection between prison and school, and how we are so seamlessly and virtuously taught to be docile.
Yeah.
And I think about that so often because, I mean, it's a cool couple of chapters that he's unfolding this argument, but also we do such harm to ourselves in service to, I have to look a certain way. I can't feel this way. I have to. And so we build these structures of shame that make us sort of stuff down everything we feel, instead of just saying, like, oh yeah, I'm exhausted.
Yeah, that you've just, very important. And education is often built on that compliance. That's the thing. You begin with compliance, and that's and so what does that do to the whole idea of being able to live with all of these things at the same time
and create and feel and live into this whole task, being a human, which is so humbling,
And I think that leads us into, let's, before we start to wrap up, let's talk about existentialism. Let's let you have, let's go for it. I love there's in your book, you called it the abyss, right? And what is an existential crisis? And I have to say, I know Red feels the same way. I love how your book is sprinkled with lots of appropriate profanity in there too, which just is like, it's perfect.
Thank you.
It's perfect. But over to you. What do you want to say? Like, in a book about joy, that we're also talking about existential crisis.
Yes, because this is the thing about an existential crisis, is that you will have one. If you haven't already, you will have multiple.
That's right.
All of us will. And they are awful. Like, this is where the term from Kierkegaard comes from, dark night of the soul. Like, it's not
That's right.
a fluffy, easy day where you're like, oh, here I am in my existential crisis. It's an undoing of a structure that you counted on and thought was permanent. And I think if this is part of life, right, this is going to so relate to what the work that you do. If this is part of life, why aren't we letting it in and talking about it? Because then we can help each other navigate the abyss. And so the abyss, just to kind of give an idea, that was the trickiest chapter. The existentialism chapter was the trickiest chapter in the book, because it's also about suicide, which is hard to talk about, hard to write about. You all just had a podcast episode about it. You know this, right? Like, it's really tricky. And one of the reasons is that we all go like this, right? Like, we all sort of brace and get spooked when that topic comes up. But then the thing that we miss is everything else that's in it. Like, yes, it's scary, but what else? What else is there? And I think there's such rich ground for rediscovery and rebuilding when we can kind of turn to an existential crisis instead of away from it. And so the abyss is what happens when anything happens in your life that sort of peels back the facade of what you thought was true and reveals something horrifying, right? Like, bad things do happen to good people. We do lose people that we love Sometimes death is completely senseless.
Mm-hmm.
Like, all of these things happen to us. And it's like in the book, I describe it as like if you've ever lived in an apartment with wall-to-wall carpeting, it's like you peel the carpet back and you're hoping for beautiful fur floors underneath it. And it's not that, right? It's like asbestos, 20 years of matting, and you're just
Old
like,
vinyl.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
Or 20 layers of vinyl, peel and stick tiles. And you're sitting there thinking like, well, I can't unknow what's there now.
Mm-hmm.
So now what?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's like goes to the title of your podcast, What Now? There's so many amazing people who've written about existential crises and existentialism. There's poetry, there's literature, there's film. Like this is an area where we have a lot of signposts and help and guidance, but we're too afraid to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that chapter almost unraveled the whole book, but I was really determined to keep it in there.
I have found with clients where we just the beginning of just naming it, and I often sometimes name it, and you're in an existential reckoning, right? Like just, and often this comes as for those that I see for grief, like as they work through their grief, it's often a natural part of their grief process.
Yeah.
And I even find just naming it and just saying like, we're just going to be here for a while.
Mm-hmm.
We're just going to be here. And of course, the hard part is the striving, the doing, but like, I don't want to feel this way. How do I get out of this? And, and then there's me just saying, this is just where we're going to be for a while. Like, this is just part of the process.
Yep.
And I'll sit in it with you. But I find in its most, just this, even just the simplicity of saying, so this is where we are.
Yeah.
We're in a dark night of the soul. And I use that phrase sometime. And that often sometimes just takes a little edge off of it. It's okay. It's like, okay, I can at least have a way of understanding this very unsettling, disorienting place I'm in right now.
And if you recognize it, then that means like I'm not alone in it. Other people have been here. We know what it's called.
That's right.
That might mean that there's a path. I don't want to think about what the path is right now, but
okay,
it's here.
And we don't have to call it a pathology. We don't have to call it a disease, a condition, or a diagnosis. It's like this universal human experience.
Yep. We know also from research that so often what comes out of that existential reckoning, what comes out of that pain is something that could not have existed if it weren't for that. And that's another thing that I think we kind of miss when we think like, oh, I don't want the existential crisis. Like, of course not, but we are.
But it's a growth. It's our growth, because we need to put, if we talk about it in the sense of worldview, that's got shattered. The way we put the world together is no longer possible. But we do need a worldview. So we end up trying to rebuild one with this issue or this tragedy or this experience as part of now how we're going to build our life together. So it is a growth piece and a joy if we get there. I mean, sometimes people don't.
100%.
We have to not bypass it. We have to go through it.
They try to think they can just numb it, as you say, and go back to what they were, but you can. That's not. They'll never. Yeah. Anyway.
And I don't want to like skim over the like. Ache isn't even big enough of a word. That is excruciation, right? You find yourself in that place, in that cave, that abyss, and you fell. You didn't. That wasn't an intentional step in. Like, oh, what's in the abyss? Let's check it out. And it's excruciating because you can't go back. And so that idea of like, oh, that ache of like, can I just go back to the world before? It completely makes sense, and also is not the direction to head in.
It reminds me of Thomas Moore's Care of the Soul, and I think he was in his chapter on depression, and I think he preferred to call it melancholy. He talks about going down into the muck, and rolling around in it, and really getting knee deep into the muck. And he says, and if we try to stop people necessarily before they get actually down into it, they then get robbed of whatever it was that they're supposed to find. And inside that muck, there's a pearl. There's a reason for going down, right? And if we let people go down into that and support them, they come back up with that pearl that they were supposed to find, that's something that, and it really becomes then a developmental milestone in the person's life, right?
Yeah.
They needed to go down there to get that thing to come back up.
Yep. Yep.
And that is so scary and so difficult. And I like your idea. You were talking about titration of just trying, when you turn that back into joy. Let's just try these in little bits. Let's look at the trauma just in little bits, and then we'll come back, just little bits.
Exactly. Yep. And that's all that you can do. And sometimes that little bit is like 5 seconds.
Yeah.
For 5 months. That's fine. Like it has to happen at the pace that
Yeah, but if we don't go down and kind of roll around in the muck and have that existential crisis or whatever it is, because we're there probably for a reason, and there's something for us to find there.
Mm-hmm. It's so funny. All the imagery like always comes up unintentionally of like caves and darkness and like
tunnels.
Exactly. And it's I just like I love the sort of archetype of that. And I think it's really important to recognize what David said a second ago, that like not everybody makes it out.
Mm-hmm.
And that is real.
And not everybody can stay in, right?
Right.
They find ways to bypass and
skip it. Mm-hmm.
Well, I have certainly loved the book and our discussion. I mean, but what it's done for me again is just it's allowed me to have hope, but to see joy in the midst of all of the stuff of life, like not having to have everything arranged so that joy can be there, but really encourage for those moments, those sparkles, those times when we can, in the midst of everything else, just experience that. And that I just love that. So thank you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm so humbled by it. I'm doing this practice on Instagram where I do a tiny little joy, like little video every single day, and people pipe in and they put their tiny little joys, and it regularly makes me cry because for 2 reasons. One, I know that a lot of the people who are in there are in their existential crises and they're in the muck and they're doing it anyway, and they're showing up every day and making sure they find something, and that's a beautiful thing. What a testament to our own tenacity, But the other thing is that it changes when you do this practice every single day. It changes the way you see the world because you start looking for them without even meaning to. And then you notice them more. And then when you notice them, you imprint them more deeply. And it's such a small thing, but I don't know. It's cool effect.
I want to give you a shout out for that. So I have been following that on Instagram. I have to tell you, I have never actually commented on anybody's posts ever, except for your tiny little joys.
Oh, yay.
Because I was following it for a bit and I was like, okay, I gotta, and the other thing is like you, I love your posts, but I love what other people are posting.
I know it.
And so then reading through that, especially in the soup of toxicity that we're in, right? In both of our countries right now, was like just reading through like the sweetness of it. And so then I have posted a few times.
Yep.
But then there's also something knowing I was going to post would make me on my morning walk go, okay, look around. What's capturing me this morning? Right. Yep. So it calls out the attention. So a shout out to you on that. Where can people reach you? Instagram, if they want to join.
Yes. It's just my handle is MCPhD. And so I post there every day. And then also on TikTok, same handle, MC.PhD. Yeah.
And let's give a shout out to your book. Cause it's just like hot off the presses, right? Or is it even fully?
It's not even fully. So I have this isn't the real version yet. It comes out May 20th.
Okay. And it's called
The Joy Reset: 6 Ways Trauma Steals Happiness and How to Win It Back.
Okay. And it's a very good read.
Such a good read.
Just loved it.
Thank you. Wow. It was a bear to write, so that
well done.
Bear. Thank you.
Is there anything that you would feel remiss if we didn't comment from the book or from this topic tonight, that or anything you just want to offer in in closing, or a story from your book, or?
Oh, there's so many things. This is a really dark time. I obviously did not plan this. The book was, you know, how books work. You sign a contract 17 years before it comes out and all this stuff. And by the time it comes out, you're like, what was I talking about again?
Do I even believe that anymore?
Who are you sure that was me? And I, in the middle of writing the book, had a huge crisis where I was like, yeah, I don't believe in joy anymore. So I'm going to have to give the advance back which I seriously considered, because I was like, I can't, in all good conscience, write this book. And then I just wrote a chapter about losing faith and joy. And so I think the last thing I want to say is that, like, I know how dark it is right now in 2025, and it is no joke. And the joy is still there.
Yeah. Yeah. So many of us, we're feeling this collective existential threat.
Yeah.
Right. So there's like our own stories, but then there's our collective.
Yeah.
So you're acknowledging, yes, that is there.
It is so there. It is so real. And it is scary. And it's scary to a point where I don't even think we understand. I don't even think we've processed COVID yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so this stuff that's unfolding right now, my goodness.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you have brought joy to me today, so thank you.
I love this conversation. I always love being with you all. Thank you so much for having me again.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you, MC.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to What Now on the Threshold of Life, Death, and Grief. What Now is produced in partnership with Hospice Peterborough, dedicated to providing compassionate care and support to individuals and families facing life-limiting illness and loss. What Now is recorded at Thin Spaces Studio in Peterborough, Ontario. Special thanks to Paradise Garage for providing the music. Technical support is by Sean Heichert, and audio engineering by Kevin Fleming. More episodes of What Now are available for free on most major podcast platforms. If you found value in our conversations, please support us by following the show, leaving a 5-star review, and sharing with your friends and loved ones. If you'd like to support the essential work of Hospice Peterborough, please consider visiting hospicepeterborough.org/donate. Your contribution helps us continue to provide vital care and support. Until next time, may you find peace and comfort on your journey.